Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another podcast. Today is going to be an amazing episode. We have Starlee Sykes on the podcast. Massiel and I listened to her a while back at a women's conference and just couldn't get over how amazing she was. We had to go up to her afterwards and be like, please come on and share your story. So for those of you who don't know, Starlee is a senior VP of the Gulf of Mexico at Canada and BP. Her areas of responsibility is BP's production and operation in the Gulf of Mexico and Canada, including investment and exploration around 5 operating hubs in the Gulf of Mexico. We pulled from her LinkedIn, and she says, every day I wake up thinking about how to make BP safer, quicker in cutting carbon emissions, and faster in digital transformation and operation assets. She has 20 years of experience, and she also goes by wife, mother of 3 boys, and a proud Aggie. Hi, Starlee. Thank you so much for coming on.
Hi, Jamie. Thanks for having me. Looking forward to it.
Hi, Starlee. So let's get straight into it. Can you tell us a little bit about what your upbringing was like? Where are you from originally? And what was life like growing up?
Yeah, glad to. So I'm originally from Utah. So I was born in Provo and then moved to Texas when I was in first grade. So first to Dallas area, and then really I grew up in San Antonio. And I'm the 5th of 6 kids. So got 2 older brothers and then 2 older sisters and a younger sister. And I'm the first ever kind of engineer in my family. My mom was a teacher and my dad was an insurance agent. And, we had a pretty kind of humble upbringing, not a lot of money to go around, but, we all worked hard and it was a happy kind of loving home.
What made you go into engineering?
Yeah, so I joke about there's lots of different things. I mean, one, I was always kind of good at math and kind of inclined towards building things, but honestly, my place in the family birth order had a bit to do with it too. My dad in particular had pretty traditional views of, gender roles. And so the older brothers did the boy jobs of mowing the lawn and fixing cars. And then the older sisters did the cooking and the cleaning. And, by the time I was really in high school age, my brothers had gone to college. So I got to mow the lawn and fix the cars and also got to cook and clean. So a bit of all of that, but I just enjoyed mechanical things and kind of had an aptitude for it.
Growing up, it sounds like, you were a very strong woman in order to, and even a little girl, because in order to do those things, like, it's a little bit out of some people's comfort zone and you jumped right into it, especially seeing, your brothers and your older sisters and them doing those same kind of, qualities of work. So did you always have kind of that confidence, and where do you think that came from at such a young age?
No, I mean, honestly, I was really kind of shy as a kid and a bit of an introvert. So, I think the trying hard stuff, and like learning to work on cars with my brothers and that type of thing was maybe a bit natural, but to really kind of be confident in who I was and put myself out there, I had to work at it. It didn't just come naturally.
What got you into oil and gas? Did you, being in Houston or even just like Texas in general, was it something that you knew growing up where, okay, this means it's a good career, there's good money after it? Or like, what was your first role? What got you into coming in here?
Yeah, so as Jamie mentioned, I went to Texas A&M and, I actually started in aerospace engineering there. So I really thought I wanted to, go work for NASA and be an astronaut someday. So I went to A&M, started in aerospace, but then after a year, I got some advice from one of the department heads and switched to mechanical, just as kind of more of a general engineering that was applicable more broadly. So once I was in mechanical, then it came time to interview for my first co-op or intern type jobs. And I cast the net pretty wide. I got job offers from Ford Automotive, from NASA, from M&M Mars, from Kimberly-Clark, and then Mobil Oil offered me a job working in West Texas in Midland. And the offer from Mobil was twice as much money as the other ones. And I was paying for my own school. And it really seemed like it would be an interesting opportunity. And I kind of followed it just to see what it was like, and ended up really enjoying it.
So what do you think helped you as a child say, I want to go work for NASA, I want to be an astronaut? Like, those aren't things that come out of younger girls' mouths, right? So that drive of wanting to be an overachiever and being like going for the highest possibilities seems to be a trait for your whole life, to seeing to where you are now at BP. Where did that come from?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, and I don't for sure know, but I just know I always had interest in space. I used to study, the distances between planets, and really got into astronomy when I was a kid. And again, as I mentioned, I always liked building things. I wasn't a kid that played with dolls. Actually, the point where it used to upset my older sister because she wanted me to play dolls with her, and I didn't want to. But I would always pick the Legos or the Lincoln Logs, and just had a real kind of desire to build and learn about stuff.
And what's even more interesting is so you didn't really know about the oil and gas space, and you got into it. And not only that, but then you went offshore. And at the time, like, there wasn't very many women offshore, and that really hasn't progressed. I think even to date, there still isn't a very large amount of women that work offshore. You even discussed in an oil magazine that, you needed somewhat of like a bodyguard when you were offshore, just to even take a shower, which, when you were talking earlier about your childhood, you mentioned that you had to work on being confident. And then now you're in an offshore application where, like, to be in that kind of space, you have to be confident in who you are, and also be confident that you feel protected out there and able to do your job. So one thing, how did you work on that skill set to build that confidence in yourself? Because you did mention that you had to build that up, because when you're younger, you didn't really have it. And then second of all, like, what kept you interested in working offshore in such an environment that, wasn't as welcoming?
Yeah, no, and thanks for the question. I mean, if I think about it, it's probably a few things. So, having older brothers certainly helped. They were from a young age kind of, teaching me about how to take care of myself. And then, going to A&M, I was, in mechanical engineering at A&M, and there weren't very many women in that degree at A&M at the time. And so I got kind of used to being, around mostly men. And so that wasn't uncomfortable for me by the time I went to go work offshore. And then what really drove me to the offshore was the technology. I kind of thought about, deep water is kind of analogous to space, right? Because you go out and explore in space, or you go out and explore, under miles of ocean, which was pretty phenomenal. We were using robots, and the deep water was pretty new at the time. That was really what drove me to BP, because it gave me the opportunity to work in the deep water, which I thought was pretty exciting. So that was the main reason. And then, honestly, the offshore, yeah, there were some challenges, but there were also a lot of really great men and women that I met out there that helped. You mentioned the bodyguard, just so it doesn't get misconstrued. I did have to put somebody outside the door when I showered, just because there wasn't a lock on the door, and so they had to put somebody out there to watch the door to make sure that nobody walked in on me. So I didn't shower very often, and I showered really fast.
I bet.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing. So looking back at your career in life thus far, what is something that you can pinpoint that was, flashing back, one of the most challenging times in your life? If you can share that with us, and how did you overcome it? Because I think a lot of times we focus on people being successful and just looking and saying, wow, look at Starlee, look how high she's gone at BP. And we tend to think it's all been this upward trajectory of success. But when we dig in, there's always the ups and downs. Do you mind sharing maybe one of those?
Yeah, I'm glad to. I mean, there's been so many, honestly, and a lot of them kind of work related, and have to do with different challenges, or safety issues during my work. But the one that probably comes to mind the most is going through a divorce. So I'm currently married for the second time, and making that choice to end a marriage, and trying to balance doing it in a way that keeps everybody whole and protects the kids, and all those things. I know a lot of people go through it. We don't really talk about it that often, but it was a really kind of hard time to work through. Silly things like, do I change my name, and how does that work, and how do I make sure people know who I am professionally? That it's kind of a lot of things to think about. But that was probably one of the hardest times.
What advice do you give to our listeners who might be going through that? Because we actually just interviewed a recent individual who's also a high level performer, and she's going through a divorce too. So, of course, it's always a disappointing thing, but you don't really know, on the end, there's always a positive. So what advice would you give to our listeners on that?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing, particularly if you get divorced, younger, I know I felt like I was one of the only ones, and that it was a unique experience, and that nobody else knew what I was going through, and that I was going to be judged, honestly, for the choices I made. And I think the advice I gave is just it's a lot more common than you think, and it won't affect you professionally, and it's okay to kind of share the struggles you're going through, because chances are that many of the people around you have been through the same thing and might be able to give you some help or support.
Mm-hmm. Massiel and I both have single mothers, so we totally understand that. And I think that a lot of the way that we are today is because we saw the struggle of our parents, and that kind of builds the person and the character that you are. So I think there's always a positive light at the end of that. But moving to your wonderful boys, you're actually a mom of 3 boys, and Massiel and I recently just had children, so we know that it kind of throws you for a whirlwind when you have that first one. I'm sure after onto the third, you're probably like, oh, I already know what I'm doing here. But what went through your mind that first time you realized you were pregnant and you were, successful in your career, you're building your career, and then all of a sudden, a lot of women feel like it's the end whenever they, first have to go tell their employer, I'm pregnant, I'm going to have a child. How did this impact you, and what advice do you give to those who are going through this?
Yeah, so as you said, I've got 3 boys, and I had the interesting experience of having, I say I had a boy in every decade. So I had my first one when I was 29, and then a second one at 34, and my last son was born when I was 42. So had the kind of variety of kind of having a child fairly young, and then also relatively older. And I can tell you the first time I got pregnant, I was excited because I always wanted to be a mom. But yeah, like you say, my career was just starting to take off. I was, working on a big project on Atlantis, which is a big deep water project. I was a full end riser project manager for some of the deepest risers in the world at the time. And I was working in a team that was mostly men whose children had left home. And so, their working hours weren't a problem for them. They worked really long hours, and it was kind of expected. So honestly, I waited a long time to tell anybody. I didn't tell anybody at work until I was 6 months pregnant. And I was able to do that because I didn't show very early, but I waited a long time. And then when I told them, it was, I was really nervous about it. And honestly, they were great. They were all super supportive. The big joke was that they wanted me to bring a pack and play to the office and have the baby with us, and and I was like, no, guys, we're not doing that. So, that I would switch jobs. So that was my own personal choice. I could have stayed doing the job that I was doing, but I just felt like for the project and for me, it was better to switch. So I took 5 months maternity leave, and then when I came back after maternity leave, I went into a finance position, which had kind of less travel and more reasonable working hours, and I thought I could manage it a little bit better.
What changed the most out of your daily routine? How did you adjust? Because it is a big adjustment once you have a child and managing your time. What do you do to, I know, especially with 3, you don't see very many high level women that also your partner works too, and you have 3 kids. How do you make it work? What's the balance look like for you?
Yeah, I mean, it was really different with each child. The first one, I came back after 5 months and put him in a daycare situation, which was fine, but it meant that there was a lot more of washing bottles and washing laundry, and having to leave early to drop them off and pick them up, and deal with any kind of issues around getting sick or that kind of stuff. So daycare kind of worked, but it was tough, honestly. And I did that for about a year, and then I started to get some more additional help. I found a wonderful nanny who came and at first part-time, and then eventually she moved to London with me to help me kind of with my first son, and that was great. And then when I had my second son, and I obviously spaced him out, but when I had my second son, she was still with me. She was with me for about 13 years. And so I felt kind of more confident that I knew how to manage things. And so I only took 8 weeks maternity leave, and I stayed in the same job. I was an operations manager at the time. I did come back at a pretty challenging time for my company. So that was harder to manage than I thought it was going to be, but it worked okay. And then my third son, I came back, and it was after I'd had him 6 months. The nanny that had been with me the whole time, she had a baby, and so we ended up, parting ways. And I tried to find more childcare support, and it was really tough. So I think everybody's situation is different, and every time, for me, anyways, each child added a different level of complexity, and I had to kind of stop and regroup and think about how I was going to manage things.
Thank you for sharing. What's wonderful about all of this is that people that you don't even know are looking up to you, are looking up saying, okay, she can do it. She also has 3 kids. Like, I think we all kind of choose several women in the industry that might not know us, and they're just saying, okay, if Starlee can do it, so can I. And I think you also mentioned on one of the magazines or in one of your interviews that, women need to have greater influence in the industry. What do you think is holding women back today, and how do you overcome those hurdles, especially looking at the statistics in the workforce? First of all, in the offshore side being pretty low in that 3.6%, I believe, and really hasn't changed over the years. And then also just in general in our industry, as much as I think companies are still trying to bring that diversity, there's still kind of that, women being held back. What do you think that that is?
Yeah, I think there's lots of reasons, and I think there's a lot of great people in this industry that have different challenges, whether it's dealing with kind of mental health or disabilities or other diversity challenges. But since we're talking about women in particular today, I think one of the biggest challenges is honestly how our society treats women, and some of the traditional roles and stereotypes around women and who they are. And the reality, I think, in many homes is that women take on a larger percentage of the childcare, and even if it's not the doing, it's certainly the worrying and the emotional part of it. So that is just true in a lot of our homes today in the society we live in. And so I think that's part of it. I think there's unconscious bias, where people might assume that if you're a woman or of a certain background, you wouldn't have a skill set or be good at something in a particular job. And then I think sometimes it could be women making choices or self-limiting as well, because they're just afraid of what what things might have to be balanced and how it could affect their life and their marriage or their personal situations. So I think it's a lot of different stuff. It's things that we talk about all the time, but we are making progress, but we still have a really long way to go.
Agree. Mm-hmm. And actually on that self-limiting kind of topic, can you elaborate on this? Because you have said in one of the articles as well as said, I've never been someone who self-limits. And we think that's very powerful. Can you explain a little bit more of like what that means to you?
Yeah, I mean, what it means to me is that whenever I've been asked to do jobs, I have said no to roles before that were, I was pregnant, I didn't want to move, or there's been reasons why I've said no to roles. But if it was a job I really wanted and I felt like it was right, then even if it wasn't perfect, I would usually say yes, and here's what I need to make it work. Mm-hmm. And I've been surprised and impressed, honestly, throughout my career, how often, when I made a counteroffer, people have said, yeah, okay, that's fine. Or I've just said, I've watched the person that was in the role before me. This happened many times. So pretty much every time in my career when I changed roles, I was following a man, and I watched how they did the job, and I looked at it and thought, wow, I can't do it that way. So I've got to redesign it and do it differently so that I can make it work. And, I think sometimes we're limited in our thinking, and we assume we have to do it, in the same way with the same hours and the same travel as the person before me did. And usually you can get a little more creative and make it work for you.
I really like that you shared that, because I think that's the biggest issue, is that especially as women, we fall into a role and we think, well, the whole team does it this way, or the guy that I follow did it this way, I have to be exactly like him. And the situation doesn't fit your daily life or your schedule. So it's really refreshing to hear that somebody at your level, you made those adjustments and that is acceptable. So I really like that you shared that. Lastly, what we'd like to talk to you about is you and your husband are been on the cover of the Houston Chronicle. I'm sure you've gotten this question a lot. You're both dual career, with the 3 boys. You're basically both on, following your dreams, your passions. Y'all didn't give up on anything, even though, you do have other priorities with your family and your children. Was there ever a moment in the relationship where you and him sat down and y'all were like, okay, one of us has to take a step back in order to manage this? We have 3 kids now, and it's difficult. Somebody needs to take a back seat. Has there ever been a discussion like that? And if not, what do you think has made it a possibility for y'all to both still pursue, the level of the careers that y'all are at?
Yeah, I mean, I think every couple that has kind of challenges or ups and downs with career and family, have to have those conversations. Probably the closest we ever got to making that choice was, I mentioned my third son. We've been a long time kind of working honestly to have him. I had some fertility challenges just associated with age, and so it took a while to get pregnant, and I got pregnant, and then as I mentioned, my nanny of a long time was having her own family, and so she was no longer available to help. So I had a series of nannies. At one point, I had 3 because my husband was traveling a lot, and it was just a lot to manage. And so it was about a year and a half when my youngest was about a year and a half. We had kind of a moment of like, I don't think this is going to work. This is just too crazy. We didn't have enough support, and my kids were such different ages that they all needed different things. And again, my husband was traveling a lot. I was traveling some. And so it was getting pretty rough. But then my sister, who raised 4 kids, I would talk to her on the phone every day and tell her how hard things were, and tell finally, but I can help you. And so she moved in with us about 2 years ago, and that's been kind of life-changing. So having my sister with us makes it like not a question anymore. So it's awesome.
That's amazing. So your sister came down and now lives with this. Is her? You said she has a family, or I missed that part?
She raised 4 kids, and her youngest was just heading off to college, and she was working as a personal trainer and was dealing with kind of the empty nest thing. And she's in a relationship, but her boyfriend is he's a undercover detective sergeant. So he's busy a lot, and so it kind of worked for her situation to come help me, and it was amazing for me. So she's been my support, for the last couple of years. I think, the biggest thing I'd say to people is, nobody does it alone, right? You've got to get help, and it's a question of how you arrange things to get the support and the help you need. Sometimes it's family, sometimes it's, a series of kind of paid or other, friendships and favors, but everybody needs help and support.
It truly does take a village, that's for sure. So on one of the last questions that we had for you is, you've obviously reached a really high level for many women in this industry. Did you ever deal with imposter syndrome? And if so, how do you, what advice do you have for those of us who do still deal with that?
Oh yeah, I mean, I deal with it all the time. People, I do speak in public a lot, but I get nervous every time. So it's just kind of natural. Whenever I'm in a big conference or a meeting or on a panel, I look around and say, wow, do I really belong here? And I still ask. I've gotten quicker at being like, yes, I do. But it's hard. I think, it's natural, particularly people that are maybe less outgoing or, have a little bit of a, more introverted tendency. It can be tough. And I think you just have to keep reminding yourself that you do belong here, and, you can do this. And, people always say, fake it till you make it. And I don't know if I really ascribe to that, but I think there is something about just going for it and trying it, and you'll be surprised at how good you do most of the time.
That's just an amazing way to end this podcast. And seriously, like you said that you were nervous, but when I watched you at that conference, you were like a pro. Like I was like, she must do this all the time. Your story was amazing. The way that you spoke, and just the way you spoke to today on the podcast. We really appreciate you coming on and sharing some of these moments with us and with our listeners. So thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you. It was great to be here, and I really enjoyed meeting you both.
Thank you, Starlee.
Thank you.